So Robert Garcia, the new trainer and perhaps soon to be old trainer of Anthony Joshua, has come out in the wake of AJ's second loss to Alexander Usyk with a very revealing interview. Now, in the run-up to the AJ Usyk rematch, I was watching a lot of Robert Garcia interviews, and I didn't get the impression that he was particularly confident. He seemed like a guy who was frustrated perhaps with the way the camp was going. He didn't put out overtly positive signs and signals. And I found it curious that when he was asked how AJ's feeling and various other things about AJ, he would say, from what I'm hearing, he's doing well, or from what I'm hearing, he's talking a lot more positively. And I'm like, hang on, you're his trainer. What do you mean from what you're hearing? Aren't you talking to him directly? Aren't you with him every day? And so to me, it showed that maybe there's tension between them, that there's a lack of communication there. And I know Robert Garcia spoke about not wanting to be his fighters' friends anymore because he used to do that with Brandon Rios and various others. And he said that was a mistake that his dad warned him about, not to get too close to the fighters, but to try and keep it. But because if you get too close to them, his thinking is they lose respect for you and they see you more as a friend rather than as their teacher. So I get that. But at the same time, I've seen Robert Garcia in the run-up to many fights before, and he's talked confidently about his charge. He's talked confidently about his fighter. That wasn't the case with Anthony Joshua. He kept saying that AJ can win this fight if he applies himself and if he has the confidence. And if the camp had gone the way that Robert Garcia wanted it to go, then surely he'd be saying he has the confidence and he's going to win the fight. You see what I'm saying? So I was and also in one of the videos I did pre-fight, I was talking about all this stuff and I said that I wonder whether Garcia is actually going to work with AJ after this, or whether it will just be a one-off. Now, based upon what Garcia says in this interview, I think there's more chance of it being a one-off than him continuing his relationship with AJ at this stage. So I'm going to read you what he said here. He said, Joshua was mentally defeated since round 10 or 11. Round 10 was a big one for Usyk. That changed the whole fight, and mentally we were defeated. At that point, we were relying on a good shot or something like that because Anthony is a hard puncher and one shot can change a fight. That is what we were hoping for, one shot, because he was dominated at that point of the fight. The fight was going well for us, but the 10th round changed everything. The last 3 rounds of the fight were the ones that changed the fight. In the 9th round, we were close to winning, perhaps even by knockout. Through round 9, we were winning the fight on the judges' scorecards, but it was decided in the last rounds. Usyk is a great fighter with a tremendous heart. Who knows how to finish strong like champions do. During that 9th round, me and the guys in the corner were telling ourselves that we had the fight, but nothing is secured until the final bell. Usyk came back stronger in the 10th round, and that changed the fight. I have even thought in these last few days that it was Anthony Joshua who mentally defeated himself. In the 9th, Joshua threw a lot of punches and almost put Usyk out. Maybe he emptied out in trying to finish Usyk off, but maybe it was just that Usyk came back or came stronger and more motivated to the 10th round. We don't know. In this fight, I think that Usyk was mentally stronger. I think he was stronger to the point that after being close to a knockout, instead of giving up, he came back stronger. His will and his desire to demonstrate to his country that he couldn't let himself lose the fight made him come back. He wanted to give a message to his country for everything that is happening there. He is a big inspiration for them. His mind was what made him turn the tide in the fight and get him to victory. And I think that Anthony's mind is a bit weaker than Usyk's because instead of going out stronger, his mind and exhaustion play games with him. Because of my own experience, I can notice when a fighter is mentally defeated. In such a situation, instructions don't work because the fighter is not listening anymore. His mind collapses. What we did with Anthony was try to motivate him and not giving instructions on how to win the fight. You have to instill images like his family to switch him on, but that didn't work either. Okay, very revealing interview by Robert Garcia. After the first Usyk fight, Peter Fury did a few interviews, and in one of them, he was actually defending Rob McCracken, and he came up with a theory regarding why Rob McCracken was saying the things he was saying to AJ in terms of brilliant jab AJ and all this kind of stuff when he was clearly losing the fight. And Peter Fury's theory was that Rob McCracken knew that AJ was mentally defeated and he was in danger potentially of getting stopped. So he was just trying to get AJ through the fight and save him from a knockout defeat. And that's why he was doing what he was doing. Now, particularly after what has happened in the AJ Usyk rematch, where Robert Garcia was doing something similar in the corner. Oh, you're winning all the rounds, champ, and this, that, and the other. Maybe he also saw the same mental fragility in Anthony Joshua. And as he said towards the end of the interview, he was just telling him things to motivate him. In the run-up to the Usyk rematch, Garcia spoke so much about trying to instill confidence in Anthony Joshua. Now, after the Ruiz fight, and perhaps his confidence issues predate the Ruiz fight, we all remember him coming out for the Ruiz fight looking like he was having a panic attack. I mean, he was chewing his gum shield. He looked overtly anxious. And after the humiliating nature of the Andy Ruiz defeat, Anthony Joshua's confidence has taken a massive, massive knock. And anyone who can't see that is either willfully ignorant or they're just completely devoid of any understanding with regards to human psychology. Anthony Joshua in the Andy Ruiz rematch was a scared fighter. Robert Garcia famously said it when he was interviewed after the Andy Ruiz AJ rematch, and he was picking Wilder to blast AJ out, Robert Garcia. Again, because he thought that AJ was psychologically shot. Even though he won the fight using his attributes, he just looked scared in there. And in the Kubrat Pulev fight, I pointed out in my post-fight video that AJ doesn't look like his old self. He still looks unsure of himself. He still has this kind of nervous, worried look on his face when he's in the ring. And I said, you guys go watch my post-fight video. I said, if this version of AJ goes in against Tyson Fury, then you can forget about him winning. I mean, he's not going to win with this mindset. No way. In order to have any chance of beating Fury, he needs to be 1,000,000% confident. But this version of AJ that I saw against Pulev, he's still got ghosts. He's still got demons in his mind from Andy Ruiz and God knows what else. Maybe he got chinned in sparring. Maybe it all goes back to the Klitschko fight. Maybe it's before then. I don't know. But what I do know is this is not a confident fighter in Anthony Joshua. At least not with regards to elite level confidence, because he's going to have more confidence than the average Joe on the street. But we're not comparing him to the average Joe on the street. We're comparing him to the Tyson Furies of the world, the Alexander Usyks of the world. He doesn't have the level of confidence that they have. You see? Now, I've seen some people, like Simon Jordan on TalkSport, saying that the reason AJ had the meltdown in the ring after the fight is because he believed his own hype and then his bubble got burst. I mean, I've never heard so much rubbish in all my life. AJ's bubble was burst against Andy Ruiz in New York. How would his bubble have been burst in the Usyk rematch? That don't make no sense. He'd already suffered 2 losses. The bubble was long gone. Simon Jordan doesn't understand the psychology of fighters. The reason Anthony Joshua had the meltdown in the ring after the fight isn't because his bubble had been burst. It's because he was struggling to deal with the things that have happened to him since his bubble got burst. And I don't think Anthony Joshua really ever had a bubble in terms of believing his own hype. Anthony Joshua early on in his career was talking about defeat, saying, oh, if I lose and when I lose, I'll deal with it and, this, that, and the other. Anthony Joshua was a fighter all along, as far as I'm concerned. who understood his own mortality. But the thing is, in boxing, of course, there's a thin line between self-belief and delusion. But the fighters who go on to be the greatest and the most successful tend to be the ones who are teetering on the brink of delusion. They think that they have a level of self-belief which is so high that when most people hear them talk, they think this guy's crazy. All right? Like Muhammad Ali. I know I talk about him a lot, but the 70s gives so many great examples with regards to heavyweight boxing. When Ali lost to Frazier and Ken Norton, and then he's coming out ringside after Foreman has destroyed Ken Norton in 2 rounds, saying he's going to whoop George Foreman and whatever. People are looking at Ali like, you're crazy. You're not going to beat George Foreman. He's wiping people out that whooped you. How can you come out and say this stuff? Again, self-belief beyond the understanding of a normal person. And that's what allowed him to go to Zaire and beat George Foreman, all right? He had to have a crazy level of self-belief. That's what it takes. Anthony Joshua doesn't have that. He's never had that. He's always had a certain amount of self-belief, but never the unshakable self-belief that an Ali had, that a Tyson Fury evidently has. Maybe not Ali level self-belief, or else he'd be fighting everyone and there wouldn't be any messing around. But Tyson Fury's definitely got more self-belief than AJ, in my view. Even someone like Deontay Wilder has more innate self-belief than Anthony Joshua. So AJ's problem was never believing his own hype. AJ's problem was not having enough confidence, not having a deep enough belief in himself. That was always his problem. And so when he got smashed to bits by Andy Ruiz, it left all types of scars psychologically, which he hasn't recovered from. And again, I'm not saying that they're all necessarily from the Ruiz fight. There might be other things, might be other reasons why he has scars. Again, maybe knockouts in sparring, the Klitschko fight, a combination of things. But certainly the manner of the Andy Ruiz defeat was so humiliating. He's never gotten over that. And so now I'm going to explain, as I've done in previous videos, but more briefly this time, what Anthony Joshua needs to do next in his career if he is to fulfill his potential. Now, I came across this article, and it's a very good article, actually. In fact, do I still have the article open, or did I close it? Okay, here it is. Now, there are certain things that I disagree with in this article. I believe it's by Michael Benson. There's certain things I disagree with in the article, but overall, I think it's very, very solid, and I agree with most of what he's written here. And he's put together a 6-step plan to rebuild Anthony Joshua's career after the Usyk defeat. Now, I often use this example, but it's a good example to keep bringing up until people understand. Lennox Lewis, when he got knocked out by Oliver McCall. Let's go and look at Lewis's record here. Here we go. So he gets knocked out, click that. He gets knocked out by Oliver McCall in his first career defeat in 2 rounds in 1994. Now, he comes back a year later, just under a year later, against Lionel Butler, a journeyman with a record of 22-10-1. In this Lionel Butler fight, go and watch it. It's on YouTube. There's no excuse for not going and watching it. In this fight, Lewis is clearly gun shy. He clearly hasn't got his confidence back. If you watch the pre-McCall Lewis and compare it to this version of Lewis, it's night and day in terms of confidence. If they'd thrown this version of Lewis in there against Holyfield, against Tyson, I don't think Tyson wasn't out of prison by this point, but again, hypothetical scenario. If you'd thrown him in there with Holyfield, with Tyson, with Riddick Bowe, etc., he probably would have got weighed in. He probably wouldn't have won because his confidence wasn't there. He needed several fights to get his confidence back. Manny Stewart, who trained Lewis for the second phase of his career, who helped rehabilitate Lewis, said that Lewis never really started believing himself until maybe the final third of his career. up until that point, Lewis was still kind of hesitant. Again, the scars, the trauma of that knockout defeat to Oliver McCall was still in the back of his mind. So he gets knocked out by McCall. He comes back and he's gun shy against the journeyman and Lionel Butler. He fights Justin Fortune, who's really another journeyman. He then fights Tommy Morrison, who is a level up from these guys, but he's not elite. He's not a Holyfield. He's not a Tyson. He's not a Riddick Bowe. He's not even a Ray Mercer. He gets Morrison out of there. He then fights Ray Mercer in his next fight. And I think that was the turning point for Lennox Lewis, or one of the turning points. Because in the Mercer fight, Lewis got hit clean with big power shots. And he went to war with Ray Mercer. If you've never seen this fight, it's a really good fight, actually. Very, very close. Lewis has to fight Mercer toe-to-toe. And he manages to come through. He doesn't get seriously hurt in the fight. He takes the shots well. He ends up kind of battered and bruised afterwards. They both do. But he proves his toughness. And Mercer says he was surprised by Lewis's toughness because he saw Lewis get taken out with one shot by Oliver McCall. He thought he was going to do the same thing to him. But Lewis proved to have better punch resistance than he anticipated. So Lewis had recovered a certain amount by this time, 2 years after the Oliver McCall defeat. Again, by bringing him back against lesser opposition, some confidence builders. That's what these fights are about, confidence building. And then gradually stepping him up. Then they had the rematch with McCall. And Lewis was still kind of gun shy in there because he's in there with a crazy guy in McCall who he thought was trying to sucker him in. But McCall was actually having some kind of nervous breakdown in the ring. Absolutely bizarre. Then he fights Henry Akinwande, and Akinwande has a nervous breakdown pretty much against Lewis, right? Where he refuses to throw punches because he's terrified. Then Lewis destroys Andrew Golota in one round, and he goes on this run where Golota gets beaten. Shannon Briggs was a bit of a war. Lewis comes through that. Zelko Mavrovich is a good fighter. Of course, the Holyfield fights. He becomes undisputed, defeats, the rest is history. The point is, he needed this rehabilitation time. They didn't just, and even if the fighter himself or some of the people around him might have wanted to throw him straight in the deep end against a tough opponent, he clearly wasn't ready for a tough opponent at that stage. So more sensible heads prevailed, and he fought a couple of journeymen to get his confidence back up. This is the great Lennox Lewis we're talking about. This is a guy who, in the eyes of most people, would destroy Anthony Joshua. This is a guy who most people feel like AJ couldn't even lace Lewis's boots. So if someone as great as Lennox Lewis needs a couple of fights to get his confidence back against journeymen, then why don't you think Anthony Joshua needs the same? Lennox Lewis, for my money, always had a higher level of confidence, natural confidence, than Anthony Joshua. But yet, he was so scarred mentally by the McCall knockout loss that he needed time to recover from it. AJ, it's as clear as day, is suffering with regards to confidence. So he needs some confidence builders. Throwing him back in the deep end immediately is idiotic, and it's going to backfire. And this is why, as I keep saying, I know you guys are sick of hearing me say it, he shouldn't have taken the Ruiz rematch. He shouldn't have taken the Usyk rematch. Because now he's just, even if he got through the Ruiz rematch, as I said he had the ability to, he was going to lose again sooner rather than later because his confidence is still not there and he's not learning certain things from a technical perspective that he needs to. He needs some learning fights and he needs some confidence building fights. Now, Michael Benson in this article goes through the 6-step plan in terms of rehabilitating AJ. He says the first thing is stay away from the ring. I don't think he needs to necessarily stay away from the ring, but it depends on how long you're talking about. He says at least 3 months because that's what Manny Stewart said regarding coming back from a brutal knockout. The fighter needs to stay away from the ring for at least 3 months, but potentially up to a year to mentally and physically recuperate. AJ isn't coming off a knockout defeat, so I wouldn't advise staying out of the ring for that long. I would say At the absolute maximum, AJ should stay away for maybe 4 or 5 months. I think he should get back in the ring much sooner than that. And I think it should be against a journeyman, even if it's a tough journeyman, someone who AJ can dominate. He needs some confidence builders. And so, again, going back to the training situation with regards to Robert Garcia, AJ was looking for confidence the whole camp. Isn't that obvious? It's not that he's so narcissistic that he can't bear to hear any criticism. It's because his confidence is shot. Can't you see that AJ's... It amazes me. I don't know, a lot of people don't like AJ for various reasons, and that's the reason that they won't see the obvious. It isn't his narcissism, right? The problem is the lack of confidence. He's begging for people to give him confidence because he doesn't have it right now. So staying away from the ring can certainly help to some degree. Time is the great healer. Michael Benson's second point is a new training camp. Now, he goes on to say here, when Joshua is ready to resume training, rather than bringing Garcia back to the UK, he should strongly consider following his coach to California. Now, that is something I definitely agree with. AJ should go to the States. Forget about the UK. Forget about trying to bring Robert Garcia to Britain. No, go to where Robert Garcia is. Because the way Garcia was talking in the run-up to the AJ fight with the rematch with Usyk, he didn't sound like he was overly keen on continuing this relationship with AJ, whereby he's going to have to be away from his family for several months on end abroad. He didn't seem keen on that. Well, AJ can go overseas. He doesn't have to train anybody in the UK, right? I know he's got a son and whatever, but the son's got a mother. AJ, it would seem, is freer to travel than Robert Garcia is. So if he retains Garcia as a trainer, and I think he should, to be honest, at least for one more fight, let's see how it goes, then he should go to the United States. All right? And of course, he's been in the United States around different gyms over the past year or so. So Michael Benson goes on to say, get mentally ready. And of course, AJ was in a mentally better place for the Usyk rematch than he was for the first fight, but he still wasn't where he needs to be to succeed at this level. He was still carrying demons in his mind from all the things that have happened to him, particularly that Andy Ruiz defeat. So he's going to need to get his mind right. And how do you get your mind right? Michael Benson says, crush some tomato cans. I agree. He needs some rehabilitation fights. He needs some confidence builders. All this talk from Eddie Hearn about throwing AJ right back in a big fight. This really is cynical stuff by Eddie Hearn. Either Eddie Hearn doesn't understand what AJ needs, or he doesn't care and he's just trying to milk him for whatever he can get out of him. AJ needs confidence builders, Mr. Hearn. He doesn't need you throwing him straight back in the deep end. But, you know, AJ's his own man, and I'm sure he has a say over who he fights and when he fights them. So he needs to understand. He needs to listen to his coach in Robert Garcia and sit down and say, what do you think I need to get my confidence where it is? And I'm sure Garcia is going to tell him, you need some easy fights. And the good thing about easy fights is you can have a lot of them in a short space of time. You don't need to have, 2 easy fights a year when you're at this stage of your career. You can go in there and have, a fight every 2 months for the first 6 months of the year. Have 3 fights in 6 months. And then after that, you can step it up. So that's the way that it's been traditionally done when you bring a fighter back, certainly in the 1990s. You don't throw him straight back in the deep end. If you're Lennox Lewis coming off the McCall defeat, you give them a Lionel Butler, you give them a Justin Fortune, you gradually step them up against Morrison. You don't throw them straight in with Holyfield or Bowe. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, crush some tomato cans and finally line up Wilder for 2023. The opponent that Joshua should go for, I think, depends on how well he progresses in terms of getting his confidence back. Because as limited as Deontay Wilder is technically, he isn't lacking in the confidence that AJ is lacking in. Wilder has confidence in abundance. So, and he's got an extremely strong will. When he's in the ring, he's going to impose himself on you like nobody else. You have to be in the right place mentally before you get in the ring with someone like that. You have to be fully confident in your ability. Your will has to be charged and strong in order to match his will. If your will isn't strong, Deontay Wilder's going to go through you. So it all depends on where AJ's at after a rehabilitation period. All this talk of throwing him straight in with this one and that one in tough fights, this is just, yeah, I don't agree with it at all. I think he's needed to step down a level since the first Ruiz fight. And that was in 2019. So we're overdue, as far as I'm concerned, a step down from world level. Some learning fights, rehabilitation fights, etc. It's overdue. So yeah, that's my take on the situation, and we'll see what happens. Well, he actually has was it a 5-point plan, or is it? I thought it was a 5-point plan, or was it 6-point? 6-step, excuse me. 6-step plan. So the last step, according to Michael Benson, should be fight Fury before retirement. Yeah. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And well, one of the things he points out is that Wilder is 37 later on this year. AJ's got several years on him. He's not as old as Deontay Wilder. So I guess the inference is that Wilder's going to start showing signs of deterioration because of his age, and AJ being quite a bit younger can capitalize on that. Maybe, but again, it all depends on where, well, we don't know what Wilder's like after the knockout defeats, of course. We have to see what he's like against Helenius, assuming he comes past, because Helenius can punch. We'll see what he's like, and you have to assess what AJ's like. I don't think it's prudent right now to target a particular fighter and say, yeah, AJ's got to fight Wilder or he's got to fight Hrgovic. Nah, if they're going to target one person right now and make this one person the final goal, it's got to be Tyson Fury. That's got to be the person, because Fury, there's more reward in beating Fury, right? First of all, what reward are you really going to get out of beating Deontay Wilder? People might take you more seriously, and they might, put more pressure on Fury to fight you because let's say you knock out Wilder in a few rounds, hypothetically. But it's still a massive risk. Whereas if you go straight for Fury, do you know what I mean, first and then maybe fight Wilder afterwards, it's perhaps a more sensible route to go. Assuming that fight can be made, assuming AJ gets himself back into a position, through becoming mandatory or whatever the case may be. Or maybe Fury just turns around and says, oh, let's have the AJ fight now. It's a nice big payday. I'll give him a voluntary defense, whatever. So, yeah, I think Robert Garcia has come out and spoken a lot of truth. I don't think Robert Garcia is a yes man. I think that the reason Robert Garcia seemed unhappy is because he's not a yes man. And in camp, he said there were several moments where him and AJ butted heads, where AJ was apparently complaining to other people that Garcia was not being complimentary enough. And I don't think this is to do with narcissism. I think it's to do with the fact that AJ has a serious lack of confidence at this stage, and he needs people to build his confidence up. So will AJ realize that Garcia means well and Garcia can actually help him moving forward? Or, will he go in a different direction because he didn't get the result that he wanted in the Usyk rematch? I'm sure he knows that Garcia wanted him to do certain things which he didn't execute in the ring. Garcia would have wanted him to apply a lot more pressure, and from earlier. I think Garcia actually said that in another interview, that AJ should have started the pressure earlier in the fight. And again, as Garcia said, he was telling AJ things to motivate him rather than giving him specific instructions. The fighter had mentally collapsed. All this stuff about AJ's bubble. AJ's bubble was, if there ever was an AJ bubble, it was burst in New York in 2019. There ain't been no bubble since then. The guy's confidence is shot. So, yeah, that's my take on it. Give me your take in the comment section below. Very, very interesting interview with Robert Garcia. Will this be the end of him as AJ's trainer, or will AJ persevere with this guy? Let me know what you think. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, it's decentralized, and it's 100% censorship free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.